The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the webinar, everyone. Cheryl, you can get started.
Hi, everybody. It's Cheryl here. Sunny's joining us as well from the Mozilla Foundation as usual. And I'm so excited today to invite and have Jeff Atwood come on as a special guest. I could go on and on and on. I'm a big fan of the work that Jeff has done, his blogging, the site in general, Stack Overflow, StackExchange, Area 51. But I'm going to pass it over right away to Jeff and let him run with it so that he can give in his own words a description of what the Stack Overflow site means, both as a reputation system and as a social Q&A site and a place where informal learning happens. So Jeff, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Okay, great. I hope everybody can hear me. So thanks for having me. A little bit of background on who I am. I had been blogging for a long time. I had a blog called codinghorror.com, and in around 2008, I realized that the work I was doing on my blog was reaching a lot more people than my day job was. So at that point, I realized I had this sort of double life of sort of Clark Kent and Superman, where I would go to my job, and I loved my job. There was nothing wrong with my job. It was a dream job. But I could influence maybe 50 people a day at most on a good day, whereas on my blog I could influence, like, tens of thousands of people and more all the time. So going to work started to seem kind of quaint at some level, and I had to realize, I had this ball of energy around my blog, all these people that were watching and paying attention, and I wanted to turn that into something useful. And so at that point, I started casting about for what to do next, and I approached a number of people online that I respected. And one of the people that responded to me was Joel Spolsky, who's very well known in programming circles. And he had this idea of a Q&A site for programmers. And honestly, it was motivated by, there was this other site called StackExchange. It has a dash in the name, because otherwise it's StackExchange. That's one of the funny things about that site. But this Q&A site had sort of a used car salesman approach to getting answers to you. So every time you went there, they tried to get you to sign up. They tried to convince you that they weren't going to show you the answer unless you paid, which wasn't really true, and all this stuff. So this is a sort of universally hated site. But the idea was fundamentally sound because people have questions. They type questions into Google, and they press enter, and then theoretically they get the answer. And this is particularly affecting programmers because a lot of programming information was on StackExchange, surprisingly. And that was sort of the goal, was to build this community of Q&A based on sort of sane community behaviors, things that we knew to work. We didn't want to have endless religious arguments about, which is better, Java or, C#. And that's what led us to design Stack Overflow the way that we designed it. So let me try showing my screen. Let's see here. My screen's kind of big. This cube. Let me
I
know.
think Jeff's volume is breaking. Can everybody hear Jeff okay?
I'm getting a little bit of a weird audio from you, Jeff. Did we lose him?
Well, I wasn't
no.
speaking for a while, but I want to make sure that you guys can see the screen as well.
Yeah.
Is that actually working? It is.
Yep.
Okay, so let me know if there's further problems with. Let me know if there's further problems with the audio. I mean, the screen might be interfering bandwidth of the screen because my screen is kind of large. I wish I could share just a window, actually. But what I have up is stackoverflow.com/badges. And what this is the badge part of Stack Overflow. And this existed from the earliest days of Stack Overflow. And the rationale behind badges, the way that we built it, we have really two ways of motivating behavior. One is the reputation system. In other words, there's a score next to my name, which doesn't matter for me because we created the thing, so my numbers are kind of imaginary. But I've highlighted it with my mouse. It's at the top of the screen where it says Jeff Atwood. There's number 22,048. That is the reputation score that I have. And this 95% of the time comes from other peers. In other words, other peers see what you wrote on the site, and they vote it up or down. And if they vote it up, you get reputation. So this is peer reputation, basically. It's like other programmers saying, hey, this person actually knows what they're talking about to some degree. Now, right next to that, though, we have these numbers, the 29, the 97, and 11. These are badges. Okay, so they are of such importance that they're always right next to the reputation number. Almost always, when you see a reputation number, you'll see a badge count next to it. And we have 3 tiers of badges, which you can kind of see explained on the legend over here. We have gold, I have 29 gold, 97 silver, and 111 bronze. Now, of course, this is based on the Olympics meme, right? I mean, gold, bronze, silver. So hopefully understandable to most people in the world. But the legend kind of explains over here the way that works. Gold is supposed to be pretty rare. Like if you're getting golds all the time, then it kind of devalues the gold badge. But there's a thought process behind each tier of badges. And let me take one step back. So conceptually, what we're trying to do here with badges is nobody reads the FAQ, right? Like when people come to a site, they just want to get things done. They don't actually want to think that much, and I don't blame them. I don't say this in a derogatory way. I say this in a this is the way it is kind of way. They have problems that they want to get solved, and they don't really care about your system. What they care about is their problem, and that's understandable. So the reputation system, the number next to your name, is there to incentivize, posting quality information that your peers will acknowledge is of value to the community and shows that you know what you're talking about. But the badge system is there to complement that because it's there to reward other dimensions of participation that aren't necessarily related to posting really great information. And if you read some of the badges, you can sort of see this. Like we have, this is in alphabetical order. There's a lot of badges. Like you can see there's about, 12 on the screen. We're only down to C. It's in alphabetical order. The very first badge, altruist, is about the bounty system. Okay. Now the bounty system is not really rewarded by reputation. To some degree it is, but what this does is it says you set a bounty on someone else's question. In other words, you liked someone else's question so much that you wanted an even better answer to it. So you sliced off some of your reputation and attached it to that question. It is kind of an act of altruism because you're basically helping someone else get an answer to their question. It's kind of like seconding in question, saying, I have this question too, and nobody has answered it to my satisfaction. Therefore, I'm going to put a bounty of my reputation on this question. So you can see where, again, this is a dimension of participation that's kind of like not really explored. I mean, you give up reputation for doing this. You don't get reputation for doing this. But it also teaches you, when you view this list, and you see altruist, you're like, bounty. What does that mean? What is a bounty? So this is an exploratory system. This is trying to teach you about the system without forcing you to read a FAQ. And speaking of the FAQ, so the very next badge, and I'm just going to go in alphabetical order because any other order is just as sane, you visited every section of the FAQ here. Literally, you actually clicked on every section. That's the only purpose of this badge. But notice that we can see that 25,000 people have done this. Now, this is a relatively new badge. We only added this in the last, I want to say, 8 to maybe 10 months. But in that time, 25,000 people have actually done this. They've gone to the FAQ and actually visited every section of the FAQ. So this is, again, a dimension of participation that the reputation system does not capture. You could have 100,000 reputation, but it doesn't mean you even touch the FAQ, right? So this is a substitute for actually, having a FAQ, having an introductory video that explains the site. This lets people explore the site and figure out how things work. It's about playing a game, right? Like, what do these badges mean? Why are these here? What is the purpose of these badges? And they motivate behavior to a really surprising degree. I had an email exchange with a programmer that I've known for a long time, and he's a very experienced programmer. He's got 3 kids. He's a grown man. He's not a kid, right? And he communicated to me, and I respect this guy a lot. He's a great programmer. And he in his email, he said, I'm still really trying to get that legendary badge, which is a gold badge. It's very hard to get. It's about hitting the rep cap on a lot of days. And I was really shocked to hear that. I was shocked to hear that this guy, who's a grown man, was like, I got to get this badge on your site, right? That really surprised me. Not that badges aren't supposed to be motivating, but they're shockingly motivating, right? Like, to a degree that's almost a little scary. Like, you have to be careful what you ask for. In other words, if you put a badge on something, it has to be a positive behavior. You have to really think through what the badge actually rewards, and also the ways it can be gamed and all that stuff. But let me just walk the list to give you a sense of like all the different dimensions. And again, this is about dimensionality, right? Badges is about rewarding ways of participating that aren't directly reflected in the reputation system. So announcer means you shared a link that got visited by 25 external IP addresses. And again, you can look at the numbers to sort of see what's going on here. Like how many people have these badges? Which of the bronze badges are really, really popular and which aren't? Like this tells me what people are doing on the site, right? If I only see 25,000 people have analytical, that might tell me not enough people are actually reading the FAQ, right? And how many people are sharing Stack Overflow posts with the world? 9,500 is a reasonable number, but you can see there's some pretty big numbers like commentator here. This is a simple one. You just left 10 comments. Now again, these are bronze, meaning they're easy to get. They're not. They reward very basic levels of participation, but that's 155,000, which is a much, much larger number. Editing. So let's get into silver badges. So here's a silver badge archaeologist. This is for editing old posts, basically, right? So you're an archaeologist. You're digging up old stuff and fixing it, hopefully, or making it better. And this is also new. We were trying to incentivize. There wasn't enough editing on the site. Like we encourage editing. This is like a mini Wikipedia, right? These questions are not tombstones that are carved into marble once and then sit that way for eternity. They're supposed to be dynamic. They're supposed to be updated when things change. They're supposed to be improved, all that stuff, and particularly the old stuff. So archaeologist is about this pattern of participation where you dig up old stuff and you're actually going in and editing it and fixing it. You can see as a silver badge, it's fairly rare. Plus, it's new. Only 246 people have it. So I'm not going to do the whole list here because you guys can read. I mean, I don't need to explain all this stuff to you, but I really encourage you to look at this. And the way we think of this is it's supposed to be exploratory. We're not supposed to tell you every tiny little detail. It's like, go do this 50 times and then you get this. You're supposed to figure it out. And that's the part of it that's fun, right? It's like a game. It's like, well, we give you a hint, a pretty strong hint, actually. It's not like this is really that hard to figure out. And then you go do the thing, and you learn how our system works. Versus, oh, God, I have to read the fact, figure out how to make this stupid thing work, right? Now it's a little bit more fun. It's a little bit more engaging. It's a little bit more like figuring out how things work on your own without having it handed to you on a silver platter. Let me go down to the first, some gold badges though before we go, because I do want to open it up to questions. I think this is a good enough introduction. Let me go down to legendary. This is the one that my friend Ned wanted. So this is about earning reputation scores. So legendary means you earned the maximum daily reputation. You can actually earn more than this. The game is there's a lot of rules at this point. But in a typical day, you get capped at 200 reputation because you're not supposed to be spending all your time on Stack Overflow. You're supposed to be programming, right? But 200 is the cap. So if you reach the cap, what we call the daily reputation cap, which isn't really explained here, but again, part of the fun. Like you'll see that number, and if you know the system, you'll know, okay, that's the daily reputation cap. 150 times, which is a lot. And only 83 people have that. Now, if we click through, we can actually see all the people that have it. And it looks like my friend actually got it. Not to expose who he is, but he does have it. So,
Hey, Jeff, we
he
got
does have it.
Cheryl here. We have a question coming in. I'm wondering, when you were describing that the system is exploratory, is intended to drive exploration, I think this ties in with the question that we just got, which is, this is a great motivational system. How does this relate to learning? So how does Stack?
Well, I have this is the attitude, like if you want to learn, say you want to learn the violin, right? What do you have to do every day to learn the violin? What do you got to do? You have to go practice the violin every frigging day. So a lot of this stuff is about getting people to come to the site, participate consistently, because that's how you learn. You learn by doing, right? So really we're trying to encourage participation, because without participation you can't really learn, right? You're doing stuff, you're communicating with your fellow programmers. And it's really a mixture for us. It's partially programming and partially just learning how to communicate with human beings, right? Which is, programmers are not necessarily great at that. And that is definitely one of the intentional side effects of the system, is to trick you into learning how to talk to human beings in a way that doesn't piss them off, in a way that explains, what's going on, in a way that they can actually understand. So a lot of it's just to drive, participation, and also understanding how the system works.
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
It's the awkward webinar cut-in, not being able to read body language.
Sure.
We have another question in Chatsy. Joanna is wondering how badges motivate different communities of users. So does this way of conceptualizing badges work better for folks who are in Stack Overflow than for somebody who's in a different Q&A community?
Well, we have, if you go to StackExchange.com sites, here I'll try to do it. I don't want to, I'll go to the site directory. Here it is. I'll make it bigger. Okay, so there's a lot of communities. Now, it does skew very technical, to be clear, and I think our system is really best for systems that are technical, and by technical I mean they have answers that can be somewhat verified. You know, if you go really far into the social sciences, I mean, you have statistics, you have studies you can do, but it's not like math, right? You can't prove to God's satisfaction that 2 + 2 = 4, right? But if you drill in, like English is very, very subjective in a lot of ways. We have an English site that does really well. It varies. I think the advantage of the system is you can completely ignore it. There's no requirement that you actually care about the badging system. It's really just there as an alternative to the FAQ. Okay, it's an alternative to the introductory video that explains, you know, how you do things on our site. You learn by doing, right? Just like when you play a video game, nobody reads the manual. I mean, this is ridiculous. Can you imagine somebody going home with a copy of Halo and saying, no, 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 I got to read the manual. Stop. Don't install this game. Don't put this in the console. I got to read the manual. Mm-hmm. You learn the game by playing the game, right? The first level of any game is really a tutorial. I mean, it masquerades as gameplay, right? But you're like doing really basic things, and you're going under things, and it's teaching you how to do basic things in the game. But you're doing it by playing, you know, and that's what the bronze badges are for. They teach you for just really, really basic things. Okay, cool. You know, you posted a question that got upvoted by one of your peers. Congratulations. And we try like hell to have the badges be based on peer actions when we can, rather than the system giving you stuff. Now, for the bronze badges, that's tougher because we're just trying to get you to explore the system and understand like how the pieces fit together. But certainly the goal is for your peers to be rewarding you most of the time. And that is a really central, if there's one thing you get out of this call, that is absolutely it, is whenever you design a badging system, try like hell to make those badges come from the peers, because that matters the most, absolutely. From the system, people don't really care.
So, and can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the iterations that you did? Because a lot of the grantees are in stages right now where, I'm going to say for the most part, not all, but many of them will be doing sort of a first iteration based around learning content that already exists. Some of the learning content is offline, so not all of it is going to be in an online environment, and not all of it is so-called gamified. So can you talk about some of the iterations that you've gone through as you developed this that involved peers? Because if I'm not mistaken, I think some of your badges and your decisions are worked through in the meta community, the community that comes together because they are really invested in the system and how it works. Are they crowdsourcing or using peer input at that level of deciding what is going to get added to the badges? Because you're talking about peer participation, like the altruism badge comes from being able to like somebody's question or somebody's answer and some of that participation, but isn't there also a point where the peers are involved in helping with the architecture somewhat?
Yes. I mean, so there is a meta community. If you go to meta.stackoverflow.com, and people propose new badges all the time. Now we have a lot of badges now, like a lot. Like the last one we added actually was about elections. We have periodic elections for moderators on all StackExchange sites. So if you really enjoy the cooking site, for example, you could actually run to be a moderator there. But there wasn't enough voting in the elections. Voting is tough. Like voting, it's just like the real world. Nobody votes. I mean, what are the participation stats for an American election? They're tiny, right? But this is just a truism that's a fact. But so what we decided to do was add a badge to help encourage that, for people to go to the election, just visit the election page, and then you get another badge for actually voting in the final phase of the election. And I believe that came out of the meta community because people were complaining that not enough people were voting in the elections. So they actually proposed, like, well, maybe we should have a badge. And I was like, you're right, we should. I don't know why we didn't have this, actually. We've had the election process in place for at least a year and a half, and it just didn't occur to us to put a badge behind it. But it makes sense. It's like the little I voted sticker, right? Now, as far as like
Yeah.
offline content, I don't know how to speak to that because our system is so heavily biased towards getting as much content as possible online, doing everything in a public way online. That's tough. I don't know if I can actually even speak to that at all. Um, the main thing from our perspective, the main mistake that we we tried to avoid is having the badge system be of the system and not of your peers. I mean, peer pressure is huge, particularly for programmers. Programmers are very competitive people. They're a little Aspergery, right? They don't always get along with other people, but they're incredibly competitive. Now, where I have seen this definitely break down a little bit is where you have communities where people aren't interested in being competitive. Now, I mean competitive in the broader sense of you're competing to build things that other people can use. It's not like you're competing to do something that is only personally yours. This stuff belongs to the world. Everything that you post on StackExchange on any site is Creative Commons. It's for the world. But it is true that programmers are very, very competitive, and the system was really built for that. There's a presentation that I really enjoy. It's called Herding Racehorses and Racing Sheep. And it's about how you motivate programmers. And the best way to motivate a programmer is to tell them that another programmer has built a better solution than he or she has. That's incredibly motivating to most programmers. In a way that telling them, you need to go build this isn't, right? It's like, Joe is building this really nicely. And then they'll just look, whoa, Joe is building this. Well, I got to build it even better, right? So the system is definitely tailored toward programmers, but you can see if I go back to the directory here, we have a cooking site. Now math is a perfect site for this. There's plenty of technical stuff, but there's a photography site, there's a home improvement site, there's a sci-fi site which I actually don't like. There's a skeptic site which is quite good, bicycles. It's not all like hardcore technical stuff. The system is really biased towards questions that can be definitively answered and supported by evidence and citations, right? Systems of opinion do not work well on our engine. It tends to completely break down because there's no objective way to judge whether an opinion is right or wrong. So I do want to throw that caveat out there. Is like our entire system is definitely biased towards situations where there can be somewhat definitively correct answers to questions. If it's just a pure bore discussion, it's not really appropriate for our system. So I want to be clear about limitations of the system.
We have a very technology-based question coming from our grantees. Can you speak a little bit about the architecture of the badge system and what technologies are used?
Yeah, it might have evolved a little bit, but when we started, we're basically just running real-time queries to see what situations exist. In other words, we're not using a trigger-based system. So there's a badge for posting 10 comments, right? It's called Commentator. It's a very simple bronze badge. You post 10 comments, and you get this bronze badge. Say, hey, you learned how the comment system works. Congratulations. Well, we don't do this by inserting into the code path of you have typed a comment and pressed enter, and we're writing it to the database. We do not do it there. We do it at the higher database level. We run a query that says, show me all users that have posted greater than 10 comments, and we make sure that all those users have the badge, right? So if you show up in that list and you do not yet have the badge, then we grant it to you, and this is run on a schedule. I'm not sure I would recommend this. It worked okay for us. I think when you're figuring out what you're doing, it makes sense to do it that way, and it hasn't broken down completely as far as I know. I'm not at StackExchange anymore, but there was no total breakdown of the system, but there were certainly badges that were very, very hard to query out this way. I mean, they were super complicated SQL. There's situations you get into where triggers might actually be simpler. We're actually inserting into the code, every time you do X, check and see if this person has the badge, versus run a query on the entire database and show me everyone that has this set of criteria. So that's the design decision that we made, and it didn't break down. But I would say you got to be careful because it's tricky sometimes to get the performance that you want out of the system. And one thing I do want to emphasize is we tried to award the badges really rapidly, particularly the bronze ones. We really want you to do something and have the reward come really rapidly for that, right? You don't want to have like 3 days later after you've forgotten all about this site, you get an email, not that we would email you, but you get an email, say you got a badge. It's like, well, I don't care, right? This is like the classic, dog training situation where you have to do it like right as the dog does the action, right? Not to equate people with dogs, but I'm saying this is how incentive systems work, right? Like you have to do it fast so it feels good, right? It's like, oh, I did something and cool, something good happened, not weeks later, right, or days later. So there is a speed argument there that you have to be careful with. And for the bronze ones tend to be easy to query out, so we didn't have too much of a problem there.
There's another question here. The voting, you were talking earlier about voting, and just going back to the part where you mentioned the importance of peers and peer interaction, particularly with the voting aspect. So the question is, voting is a pretty stark assessment. So assessment is a big part of what our grantees are doing, a little bit different, like as you know, in formal and to some extent informal learning environments, there's usually an assessment piece. So voting is a pretty stark assessment. How do you nurture, the question is shy learners or learners who are afraid to share? And maybe, it sounds like maybe what we're seeing with your system and what some other people are experiencing is that overlap between rewarding participation and rewarding learning. And I know that's kind of a difficult thing to tease out, but I'm just going to read the question in full again. Voting is a pretty stark assessment. How do you nurture shy learners or learners who are afraid to share?
Well, let me go to the homepage. So if we go to stackoverflow.com, the homepage, let me pick something from the week that's hot. So here's something popular. So one thing I would recommend is definitely we allow downvoting because our system is really kind of science-based. What you posted is either verifiably correct or verifiably incorrect. I think as your system trends towards things that cannot be verified, you should not allow downvoting. I think you should only allow upvoting. You lose some resolution in the system because you can't separate the truly bad content from the just okay or mediocre or not interesting content. But the only thing that people really object to is they definitely object to getting downvoted. Every day there's somebody on Meta complaining that they got downvoted because it doesn't feel good to get downvoted, right? It really, really doesn't. But I think that's the key decision. And I think a lot of systems it's safe to make the decision, you know what, we're not going to have downvoting because it's a little too painful. And I think that's a fine decision. I would not judge anyone for doing that because I've dealt with years of people complaining about getting downvoted. But again, we're dealing with programmers, and I think good programmers can deal with constructive criticism of like, look, this is objectively wrong. What you're proposing is a little bit dangerous, right? Or I disagree strongly with it, right? Because it's on a technical basis. I can tell you why you shouldn't really be doing that or telling people to do that. But as you get away from verifiably incorrect stuff, that becomes very, very risky. But getting your stuff voted up feels great. Right? Like I don't think anyone's going to complain about getting upvoted a ton. So to take away from what you see here, I would say just be very, very careful with the concept of downvoting. And interestingly enough, if you go to the comments here, you'll notice there's only upvotes on comments. Partially that's because comments are third-class citizens in our system. We don't really want discussion. We want edits to the underlying post. So the perfect Stack Overflow comment results in an edit to the post and is then deleted. That's the absolute perfect comment because you actually want everything migrated into the body of the post. I don't want to have to read 3 pages of discussion to get to the useful information. You're supposed to, percolate all this up into an edited version that reflects the current perfect version of the information. And that also applies to the voting system, meaning I'm looking at the question here, and if I scroll down, this is the highest voted answer. It's also the accepted answer, has the green check mark. So the question owner liked this as well. That's really more of a social convention than anything else. And as I scroll down, I'm getting to less valuable answers. So I don't have to scroll too much to get everything that I need, right? The best information kind of floats to the top, which a simple upvote system will definitely get you that. So long story short, just be very, very careful with downvoting. I mean, it is a scary system in some ways.
And I hope I'm asking this question with the right emphasis. How do you get to the reward numbers? Is it through iteration?
We just kind of winged it. If I go to the FAQ, let me go to the FAQ and look at the. If you go to the FAQ, if you're curious about exactly how it works, click on what is a reputation here on the right on the FAQ. And that'll drill through to the actual values, right? So I'm actually now bringing up in the FAQ the section that says, what is reputation? And as you can see, reputation, it doesn't actually mean you know programming. It means it's a measurement of how much the community trusts you. right? You got to convince people that you actually know.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Just later in the system is the relative value of questions and answers. We realized that we had kind of screwed up because questions are not as valuable as answers. The world is full of questions. There's billions of questions about everything you can possibly imagine. What you don't actually have is billions of fantastic answers that explain, what's going on. So by incentivizing questions as much as answers, we were screwing up because answers are way more valuable than questions. I mean, I know this is kind of a weird position to take from, there are no dumb questions, but in our experience, there are actually a lot of dumb questions. And a good question is certainly worth upvoting, but the output of work in a Q&A system is the answer, without a doubt. I mean, that's what people are searching for. They're not searching for other people that have the same question they do. They're searching for the answer, right? So our incentive system was really off, and we halved that. So questions are now worth 5, whereas they were worth 10. And there was some resentment in the community because people could come in and ask literally hundreds of questions, not provide any answers at all, and get a fairly large reputation score that felt kind of unfair. Because these are people that all they really did was produce a bunch of questions. And that's not wrong in and of itself. But to say that those people have the same reputation as somebody who provides tons of amazing answers every day, that's broken, right?
So is it fair to say that the badges are about participation and the reputation or the points are about knowledge or demonstration of knowledge?
Trust. I would characterize it more as trust. And trust to programmers does come from skill, knowledge and skill, right? I mean, that's how programmers tend to judge each other, is how much that they know.
One of our grantees is asking you to talk a little bit more about answers. Their project's going to have a wide range of meaningful answers.
Okay. So there's certainly more than one right way to do it. If I go back to that question that I had up. So here's a good question. It happens to be one of the top questions for the week. Just because this has 152 votes and the accepted check mark. Now again, this is a social convention. This check mark does not mean objectively correct. You really are viewing two systems in opposition here. One is the question owner deciding that they really like this answer. And the second one is the community deciding that they like this answer. These are not always the same thing. It's not uncommon to see a question, an answer that has a check mark that has way less votes than another answer, meaning the community disagreed with the question owner about the value of the answers that they got. This does happen. But scrolling down, there's more than one right way to do it. In fact, that's like, I believe, a Perl truism. There's always more than one way to do it. Usually there's thousands of ways to do it. And nobody can really even tell you which one's the best way, right? But the community will agree with some solutions more than others. And some of these, sometimes what you get is restatements of the answer in different ways, but other times what you get is truly different answers that are, different ways of solving the problem that the question presented. So you're having the community weigh in on how much they like these alternatives, but the goal is certainly for people to read, say, the top 3 or 4, right? I mean, I don't want people to stop reading. Let me go back to questions and pick another one. So here's the number of answers. You can see some of these get quite a few answers. Now, a question that gets more than, say, 14 is not bad, 12, 8, 14. These are all reasonable numbers, but once a question gets 30 answers, we start to dislike that question, because it's not really a question. It's like, it's a poll, it's a survey, it's a discussion, it's a set of opinions. If there's 30 ways to do it, that means we've done something wrong, right, in the way that we've constructed the system. But there's 8 ways to do it, 6, 2, 3, 4. These are all, I think, reasonable ways to look at it. So if we look here at this Java question, this is a pretty simple question about interrupting an infinite loop. Let's see here. Yeah, so yeah, these are proposing different things. So here's proposing basically calling a runtime exception to kick out. That's definitely a different approach than this, which is he's basically setting a variable here, canceled, right? So you're seeing true alternative solutions here. And I certainly would want people to say, oh, to exit an infinite loop, I must throw an exception. That's insane, right? Like there's no no sane programmer would tell you that's the way you end an infinite loop, whereas using a variable is much more traditional. So certainly we support the idea of multiple answers to a question. It's not like there's one perfect answer that everyone must look at, but we also don't want you to read 3 pages of discussion to get the answers that you need. So we have this sort of relationship with answers where if there's too many of them, we start to get nervous. But if there's 5, 10, 12, that's okay.
I think this is really interesting, and I'm glad that you mentioned the competitive nature. And I'm just thinking about some of the grantees, and I know with obviously the K-12 environment is going to be very different. I can see how peer can be interpreted as both cooperative and collaborative and competitive, and obviously in this environment, competition is very comfortable and sort of suits the community very well. I'm going to ask this one question that came from somebody who's a very active user of Stack Overflow, and sort of get if you could talk a little bit about the different ways in different communities you deal with this desire to be able to participate at a high level, but the system doesn't allow you to. So let me read the question. As an avid user of Stack Overflow as a resource, I haven't earned enough points to vote on good answers. Working on it. In the meantime, have you considered a way for low-level users like myself to thank people for their great answers?
We do. In fact, if I open this, I'm going to go into incognito mode, which means I'm not going to be logged in as me. So I'm opening a new, now this is a not logged in user. There's a couple of things you're going to notice immediately. First of all, there's more advertisements. One of the perks you get for reputation is we suppress some of the advertisements. You're going to see an ad here, and there's an ad at the top of the page. But I can't really do anything, right? So my options are I can share a permalink to this question. Great. And if I'm logged in, I can get a badge for that, right? As we previously discussed. But the other important thing is you can click on improve this question, meaning if I want to propose an edit to this question, I can do that as a not logged in user. It has to go through approval queue, and peers have to judge it, but you could do that. You actually will get reputation for that, meaning if you go through and you propose improvements to questions that are legitimate improvements, you get, I think, I want to say three reputation for each approved edit. So that's one way to earn reputation, is to go in and edit and fix typos and make other improvements, just formatting improvements. There's tons of ways. Most people, the average post, there's at least a few ways you can improve it. The other thing you do is if you scroll down here below the comments, you can see as I mouse in and out, hopefully you're seeing that flashing of the content, but you can tell us if this was a useful post, so you can actually factor in feedback. It's not a vote, but it is factored in other ways into the system. Anonymous user feedback, like is this a good answer? I actually don't like that answer, so I'm going to say this one was useful to me. Right.
Hey, Jeff?
Yes?
This is Ruby. I just wanted to let you know that we're having a bigger lag than usual between what we see on your screen and when you're doing it. So if you want to pause for a minute when you're referring to something you've just pulled up, just pause a few extra seconds until we all catch up with you.
Well, this is, yeah, unfortunately my monitor is giant. I wish I had a smaller monitor. This is why I wish I could share just a window. That would be better. But sure, I will. So all I'm really showing here is when you come in as an anonymous user, there's two things you can do. You can click on improve this answer, and you can actually get reputation for that if you submit an edit that is approved. And the second thing is at the bottom of the post under the comments, there's a feedback link of was this useful to you, yes or no. And we do actually look at that. It was kind of fun to look at anonymous users weighing in on stuff. And it was interesting because it would show us trouble areas in the system where a lot of anonymous users were coming in and going, look, this is not useful. Like they were downvoting stuff, basically. They were saying this is not useful content. And it showed us trouble areas where we had really bad content on the internet that was ours, that we owned. So it was kind of fun to query for that and see stuff that didn't have a lot of voting, because again, voting requires at least 15 reputation to even get your ability to upvote. But the anonymous users were weighing in. They tend to weigh in more for stuff that's hurting them. But that's good. That helps us, right? That's signal that helps us figure out what's going on. The upvotes that anonymous users leave, the this was useful stuff, tends to align closely with voting for the most part. But occasionally you get those diamonds in the rough where there's 0 votes, like a content has 0 votes, but it's getting a lot of traffic, and anonymous users are telling us, yes, this is very useful, or no, this is not useful. So more signal is never a bad thing. So even as a 0 reputation user, you can do a number of things, including editing. They can give you enough reputation to at least get the right to vote and get going. And I apologize for the lag. I'll try to go slower with my screen updates.
Thanks. Cheryl, are you still there?
I think Cheryl dropped
Maybe
off.
Yeah, I think.
I think
Oh, yeah,
Cheryl's
go
not
ahead,
there.
Sunny.
Sorry, I lost everybody there for a second.
Cute. Yay.
So I'm sorry if I was going to ask another question because I didn't hear where you were at, Jeff.
Sure, go ahead.
So the question is, have you played around? I'm actually really interested in this too, the idea of how you iterated with a community that already has become accustomed or, I don't know what the word is, but they've adapted to the system and the idea of iterating. The question is, have you played around or balanced different personality types or motivational types within the reward system? So with the badges, do you favor and reward one type of motivation, like increase social reputation over another, like broaden my skills, or do you try to cover many types?
I think honestly we designed for ourselves. I think we sort of shamelessly said, we're programmers plus or minus 20%. There's some variance in programmers. And we kind of built a system that really felt good to us. I wasn't really trying to satisfy any audience other than myself, to be perfectly honest. And I think what works in our favor there is there's an honesty in that design decision where we say, look, this isn't actually going to work for every community because it's not supposed to. But on the other hand, I really deeply believe the world is getting geekier every day, right? Like, I mean, when I was a kid, I spent all day on computers. Nobody did this, right? But now, the world is more similar to the way I look at it now than it was when I was a teenager, without a doubt, right? I mean, just the common acceptance of like doing stuff on the computer is huge. The common acceptance of having relationships online. I mean, I was doing that on CompuServe in 1986, and it was freaky, right? So I'm a little bit confident for the system that we're designing. I think the world is getting geekier. I think that's safe. Now, would I say that every community can use the system or should be designed the same way? Of course, absolutely not. That's definitely not true. Let me close this window and go back to the badge list. Now, badges are fun because they have to reward positive behaviors. Okay, you can't have a badge that indirectly rewards something that's negative. Let me give you an example where this can be somewhat subtle. The community told us on Meta Stack Overflow, they said, hey, you know what you guys should have? You guys should have a badge that rewards questions that have as many upvotes as downvotes, or posts that have as many upvotes as downvotes. And my response to that was like, why would I reward controversy? We don't want controversy here. This is not about controversy, right? Like, that's not what this site does. So for us to have a badge that encourages people to post stuff that's getting upvoted as much as downvoted is insane, frankly. Right? Like, they're not really thinking through what that would actually encourage, right? Like, and it would, for a certain segment of the audience, they would try to get this badge. They would actually do things to get this badge, and that implies you would be posting controversial stuff or stuff that's discussion-y, right? Like, do you love this or do you hate it? And that's not really what you're supposed to be doing here. This is about science in the small, right? This is about let's run some science, let's get some data, let's provide some citations, let's see what we can find here. It's not about emotions, it's not about controversy. It's about research and then sharing your research with the world. So it can be a little tricky, but the other thing that I do like about the badge system is we can have fun badges. Like, we have one, let me scroll down here. I'm going to go slow. I have to find it. Okay. Actually, near the bottom, I'm going to let the display stabilize. There's a badge called Tumbleweed. Now, this is a ridiculous badge. There's no defensible reason to have this badge called Tumbleweed, because it's kind of like a little bit of a joke, right? It's saying, look, you posted a question that got basically no activity. Here's your tumbleweed. Congratulations, right? You posted a tumbleweed. It just rolled along the highway, and then it was gone, and nobody seemed to care. So really, we technically shouldn't have this badge. But, I felt this was like a cookie. This was like, look, I'm sorry. Like, you tried. You posted a question. It didn't work out. But here's your cookie, right? It's just a little bit for fun. Now, how far you want to push that into the system, I think that's one of the fun things about a badge system is there's definitely more flexibility versus the reputation system, which is very seriously audited by our users. Like they object. Let me give you an example of where this is problematic. So in the early days of Stack Overflow, we didn't really understand the entire system we were building, which is, I think, pretty common when you're building new systems. You don't really understand all the implications of the things you're designing. But people would post questions like, what is your favorite food as a programmer? Like, what's your favorite programming food? Right? As a programmer, you know, I don't even know why that would be programming related, right? But it got posted. Or what's the funniest comment that you've seen in source code? In other words, as you read the source code, somebody left some hilarious comment, so you would post it there. And what I didn't realize at the time, what the community basically taught us, is that this pollutes the reputation system because people are getting reputation for posting things like a cartoon or a favorite food that has nothing to do with their ability as a programmer. Compare with somebody who posts an amazing, deep technical answer, really great technical answer to a programming question. They would get half the reputation as somebody who posted a hilarious cartoon on our site of like, look at this programming cartoon. He didn't even create that cartoon. It was literally cut and pasted from another site. So the reputation system started to drive the community to sort of get rid of this content. And I don't think they were wrong, but it's not something that I really saw, and it's something that came out of putting people in front of a reputation system. They start optimizing for what the reputation system is telling them to do, and the reputation system on Stack Overflow is telling people that this number means you're a competent programmer, not a competent cut and paster of cartoons onto a website.
Right. Well, I wonder, maybe you could respond to this second part of the question. This person's extremely active in reading information on Stack Overflow every day to grow her or his, I'm not sure, skills, ability, but reputation hasn't yet motivated me enough to play the badges game. So what do you do with somebody like that in your community?
Well, I think there's a huge, there's an iceberg type phenomenon where, you know, only a tiny percentage of people are really active on the site. So the average question will be, you know, posted once, answered 5 times, and hopefully viewed thousands to tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of times. And I think that's a perfectly fine use case of the system, and it's really one of the goals of the system is to produce these great artifacts that help a lot of people. And that doesn't require everybody who walks by to do so, to actually interact with it other than reading. Like passively reading is a perfectly fine way to view Stack Overflow. Mm-hmm. You know, just like not everybody wants to be a rock climber, right? Not everybody's motivated to actually get up the wall, and that's actually okay, right?
Although there's
I think we explicitly try to serve those people.
Sorry, I was going to say one thing that we haven't really touched on, but one thing that I think makes your system very interesting to our grantees in particular is Careers 2.0. So regardless of the badges and regardless of the reputation, you still can end up using what we call the social proof, and I actually don't know, that may have come from you, Jeff. I know it emerged during the Badges for Lifelong Learning initiative as a great way to talk about the social proof of your knowledge. So when you look at in Careers 2.0, and maybe you can describe to people a little bit how this works, but when you look at somebody's candidate page, it will show the questions and the answers that demonstrate your knowledge. So there's other ways to, I guess, reward somebody for their participation, both answering, asking questions that don't just have to do with the badges and the reputation. Is that correct?
Well, sure. It's what I call leaving a breadcrumb trail of your awesomeness on the internet. So these fun-size units of work, these 5 minutes that you spend answering a question or asking a question, can be turned into stuff that helps you because it's associated with you strongly. I can go in and edit it, but you're still the question owner or the post owner. The reputation that the upvotes goes to you, and you can use this as proof that, hey, I actually do know what I'm talking about, and the community believes that I know what I'm talking about. And the other thing that I like about it is it's easy to judge, right? Like, even if I find on a lot of StackExchange sites, I don't know. I mean, I'm technical, but I'm not technical on every topic under the sun, nor do I know anything about, for example, photography. I know nothing. But I can go on the photography site and I can tell you when I see a really well-written answer that explains something in a way that I can understand it. I can judge that. Whereas if you sent me to say GitHub, I mean that's a real challenge because A, I have to understand the language that I'm looking at. It's deeply, incredibly, insanely technical. But this idea of human communication is just the bedrock of so many activities, whether they're technical or not. And this is stuff you can point to, and I think employers can look at this too and say, you know, are your answers snarky? Are you mean in your answers? You know, are you are you showing off in your answers? Or is your goal to actually help other people learn, right? And communicate with other people. This comes across really clearly in a lot of writing on any technical topic, whether you know the topic or not. And certainly that's the kind of stuff on Career Stack Overflow, you attach sort of your best answers, your best questions to your profile so people can get a sense of who you are and how you communicate with other human beings. And that to me is so much more important than whether you can sling code. It's whether you're going to piss me off, right? Whether we're going to get in fights, whether you're going to, you know, we're going to have to tussle, right? Because like you're combative, right? That's the first thing I want to know more than whether you're a brilliant coder. Is I want to read your writing, and certainly that kind of stuff is essential to attach to careers. I mean, I can bring up careers. Oop. Sorry.
And I think that's good. That's interesting in terms of a learner perspective, just trying to make this fit a little bit with what our grantees are working on. So you allow, or you make it possible so that people can select how they present themselves, so they can pick which questions they want to use to demonstrate their best work.
So here's Joel. Joel's the co-founder. So here's him sort of demoing how it works, like which tags you know stuff about, things you like, things you dislike, your experience, his accounts. Here's his top answers. So you can sort of drill in and see, you know, what's going on here, how he writes. Sorry, I know this is, I'll stop scrolling. But you can link more than just Stack Overflow. You can link your repositories on GitHub and, you know, Bitbucket and places like that. You can show off your blog entries, anything you've written online. It's a place, it's not just about, it's about showing off all your breadcrumb trails of your awesomeness, not just the ones that we created for you or we helped you create. But certainly that's the goal. That's the way I always explain it. It's like you want to leave breadcrumb trails of your awesomeness in the world. You absolutely want to do this.
We have one question that has been here for a while. I've been trying to figure out when to sneak it in there. From Sunny, how do you put measures in place to prevent gaming of your system?
That's actually, I think, fairly easy. I think a lot of people just don't do it. The way to do that is every time you put something in the system, think, put yourself in the shoes of, put on your Darth Vader evil hat and think about how you're going to use that to destroy the system. And if you've thought that through, 90% of the time you're okay. Where I see people get into trouble is they didn't think about it at all, right? They're like, oh, we'll just design this and you know people will use it, but they didn't think, okay, now I'm evil. I'm going to use this to create maximum havoc in the system. I'm going to do everything I can to break this because I'm bored and I hate the system. If you've thought that through, you're usually okay. I will say that almost definitively, you're okay. I mean, there's a few times where, even though we do that religiously at Stack Overflow and StackExchange, there were a few times when people came up with stuff that I could not have figured out, right? But it was somewhat rare. If you thought through the common evil cases, you're okay. And actually, if the thing you're designing doesn't pass the evil test, if you can think of like 10 different ways this could be used to destroy you, then you need to go back to the drawing board and come back with something else. Because it'll definitely happen, right? Like, it's going to happen.
Okay, we've got one question here. I was just looking at the time, so we might have time if there are any people who want to squeeze in a question before exactly right at 3 o'clock. We've got a little bit of time left, so I'm going to ask this one here. Do points or badges expire? For instance, does someone's reputation lose value if he or she does not log in for a while?
No. That comes up occasionally on Meta, and one thing I should mention, because I like to mention this every time I talk about Stack Overflow and StackExchange, is you absolutely must have what we call a meta community. In other words, a governmental site to discuss the site that you're building. This is absolutely critical for stuff like this to come up and be discussed by the community and you. We screwed this up initially with Stack Overflow. I thought that it was like Fight Club. You know, you didn't need to talk about Stack Overflow because we were here to talk about programming. Let's talk about programming. But there was this overwhelming desire on the part of many participants to talk about the system, to talk about like why it worked the way it worked, how it worked the way it worked. And by pushing these people away, you're pushing away your leaders, people that actually want to help you run the system, that love the system so much that they want to think about it, right, versus just passively participate. So don't make that mistake that we made. We fixed that, fortunately, but you always want to have a place for your community to go to discuss the thing that you're doing with you. Absolutely critical. And one of the things that comes up with some regularity on the meta site is, hey, shouldn't reputation eventually wear out, right? Like, because you knew something 10 years ago doesn't mean you know anything about it today. And I think this would be very corrosive to the community. For one thing, there's the effect where if you take something away that you've given to someone, they'll basically hate you forever, right? There's like, I'm trying to remember the exact term for this. I'm drawing a blank, but it's human nature. But like, you can't. The number always has to go up. You can't take away from the number, even though we actually do in some cases take away from the number, but we try to be very quiet about it. I remembered loss aversion. So you run into this loss aversion. Look this up on Wikipedia if you haven't already, because loss aversion is, oh my God, it's so intrinsic to human nature. If you screw this up, you're going to have a lot of pissed off people to talk to, because let me give you a really dumb example of this. So we were on vacation with my son Henry. This was before we had the twin baby girls, and we got these temporary tattoo sheets for Henry. And I was like, okay, cool, temporary tattoos. And as a part of doing the tattoos, they had these sheets covering them, and I didn't realize, but if you pull the sheet off, the protective layer, it basically exposes it ruins all the tattoos. So I did this I had 3 sheets of tattoos, and I did this on one of the sheets of tattoos. I was like, oh man, I have ruined 1/3 of these tattoos. I was like, I got to go back to the store now and get more tattoos because I can't. I've lost these tattoos. And then I realized this is crazy, right? These are temporary tattoos for my son. There are 3 sheets of these. Why would I care if I lost 1 sheet of tattoos? But it like really, really bothered me that I had lost this thing that I had, right? Even though it didn't matter at all. And all reputation systems, I think, work that way. You cannot take away. At great peril to your soul, do you start taking away stuff like that? Just always just add more. And just look up loss aversion on Wikipedia. There's tons of reading there, and it's really fascinating. And it's also fascinating in the sense that most people do this without realizing it, right? Like, even if you're given something for free that has no value, it's like if you start losing, you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're taking my free thing away from me? Whoa, buddy, right? Just think about what you're doing there. So yeah, loss aversion, man.
So Jeff, we have 2 minutes left. I'm really curious what kind of process you went through when you were first designing and developing the system. I know you're a programmer yourself, so I'm sure you were able to bring a lot just from your own experience, but were there any resources that were helpful or any kind of thinking or design or development process that you went through that our grantees might find useful?
Yeah, all of Clay Shirky's books. Clay Shirky is a really great thinker in this area, and I think he's kind of a genius, actually. I would definitely read Cognitive Surplus and Here Comes Everybody, which are 2 Clay Shirky books. I think those are absolutely essential. Must-read items for anybody building any kind of online community of any sort. That would be my #1 recommendation.
And was that also, I'm actually, when I discovered Area 51, it was after I had discovered Stack Overflow and StackExchange. Was that something that you were doing in the very beginning, or was that a process that you developed after new communities started to sort of spawn off of the main Stack Overflow site?
Well, we were launching once we had realized we had built a mousetrap that kind of worked, it wasn't just about programming, it seemed to be a little bit broader. That was certainly the goal. The goal in the beginning was just to build it for programmers. We had no original intentions of building it for, photographers and cyclists and all that stuff. But as time went on, we realized that this is really working like gangbusters. Like, this is working beyond our wildest imaginations great, right? So we're like, well, where else can this work? And we launched sites editorially for a little while because we were playing the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game, because you have programmers that are also system administrators. You have programmers that are also computer nuts, obviously, right? This is a very, very tiny step. But then you could get from programmers to system administrators to homebrewers to pilots, right? Eventually you get far enough out that you're not talking about programmers, friend of a friend of a friend. But we realized that we can't launch the sites editorially. We don't know, I don't know what topics to launch, right? I mean, eventually you sort of run out of obvious topics to launch, and the editorial system breaks down. So we asked the community to propose, what would you like there to be a Q&A site on? And sometimes they propose things that really don't work, which is okay, because we say the Area 51 process is an experiment. We'll see how it goes. But the community that's the community telling us what they think, which topics they think deserve a Q&A site on our engine. May or may not work, but we'll try it if it gets a certain amount of critical mass, and they can define the topic with some reasonable level of fidelity at the beginning, like what is on topic, what is off topic, what are the actual questions that will be asked here, and how many people within the network will support it, would raise their hand and say, I would go there. If there was a site on Legos, I would actually go there. That site is actually failing miserably, by the way, but say you had a Lego site, how many people would actually go there? It's called bricks.StackExchange.
Well, that is so helpful. Thank you so much. I got a lot out of listening, and it was such a privilege to be able to have your time all to ourselves for 60 minutes. We're right at 3 o'clock, and I know you've got a few responsibilities, twins and 3 kids. So I'm going to wrap it right here and just say thank you so much. I've been getting great feedback from people by Jabber, and everybody's really enjoyed this. So thank you so much.
Great.
We recorded it, and we'll be putting it up as a YouTube link. I'll share it with you, Jeff. And again, I can thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time throughout this whole initiative, and we constantly refer to you and the work you've done and your team at Stack Overflow. So thanks from everybody, and thanks for joining us, and we'll be in touch.
You're quite welcome. I hope it was useful.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Bye, everyone.